Hello, how are you doing? Welcome to something that hasn't happened for almost a year. It is Joe and Toby talks about F1, and with the F1 2022 season starting this weekend with the Bahrain Grand Prix, we are underway after the qualifying session today. I'm joined by my co-host Toby, who'll be running through his reactions to today's qualifying session, seeing who's quickest and looking into his crystal ball to see who is going to be the 2022 driver as well as the Constructors champion. Hello Toby, how are you doing today?
Well, I remember us doing this a couple of years ago and failing miserably, so I'm looking forward to doing exactly the same again. You can probably all hear I'm a bit bummed up, but we'll brave through. F1's back, so I'm quite excited. There's MotoGP this weekend. We've had Cheltenham yesterday. The least said about that, the better. But I'm really excited, and the predictions I've put forward, most of them I believe. Some of them may be a bit tongue-in-cheek, but I'm looking forward to this, and I have to say I've really enjoyed qualifying today because... I expected one team. Let's not be too explicit at this point, but I expected one team to be quicker than the rest, quite significantly quicker than the rest. Watching yesterday, and that wasn't the case. So, really looking forward to it, and looks like we've got a good season on the cards, and that makes this prediction like a hell of a lot trickier.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we've done this almost every year. I think we missed out 2021, but we have done this most seasons over the last few years. And generally, we always are predicting Mercedes or Red Bull to romp away with the championship. So hopefully this year will be a little bit different and we'll have some surprises in there for you. But no, it was really exciting. And I remember messaging you, it almost felt like the 2010-13 era again, where you don't actually know which team are going to end up on pole position. And that was quite nice. I don't know how you felt going into qualifying. Obviously, you said you thought one team were going to be quicker, but seeing that those Q1 times tumble, how did that make you feel?
It was very strange almost, because you're sitting there thinking, right, after practice I've sort of got an idea of what's going to happen, and then you get the likes of Bottas jumping up into fourth.
Yeah,
and still sitting there thinking, no, it's not going to happen yet. And I'm kind of still of that opinion, funnily enough, that we've still not seen the true pace. And I think that from what Sky was saying today, that there are going to be cars that are a lot more suited to one lap pace, and cars that are a lot better in the Grand Prix. I've got a feeling Mercedes might be one of those, because obviously qualifying the best of fifth today and ninth for George Russell. I think they're going to be better in a race scenario. So it is going to be interesting, really is. But to see some of the variants, we had 7 teams in Q3, which is brilliant. And they're just being unpredictable again, because one of the big things we've had in the past, and particularly looking back sort of, nearly 10 years ago, I suppose now, we had that bottom 3 teams. And Q1 was always so predictable. And even in the last couple of years, we've had that. Especially last year, unless Russell did something brilliant, most race you were saying, right, it's going to be 2 Haas, 2 Williams, and then somebody else, which was usually either Yuki Tsunoda or Lance Stroll. And we might end up with the same this year, because I think we have got a defined bottom 2 teams. But I think the glory is you've got that unpredictability, which I think even last year you might have had at the start, but as you got into the season, there was that defined order. There's probably maybe 4 or 5 clumps of teams. You had Mercedes and Red Bull at the top. You probably had Ferrari and McLaren best the rest most weekends. So your top 10 was pretty much established, and Q2 and Q1 wasn't that unpredictable, apart from the odd race. But I think that this year, because I know it's very early days, but I think there are 3 clumps of teams for me. I was talking about this with you just before we started. It's almost like there's a clump of 3 teams at the top, and then you've got a clump of 5. So any which team, the team that are in 4th could go out in Q2. But I feel like you didn't have that last year. You'd be ridiculous to say that. I know we did have it at certain tracks, but that was due to performance. That you wouldn't have thought that Ferrari and McLaren last year, that you would consider to be team 3 and 4, certainly based off the Constructors' Championship anyway. You wouldn't have thought they would go out in Q2 regularly, but I think that there's a real chance of that happening this year. So the unpredictability of that is great, and obviously on a bigger scale than that, the upper unpredictability of who's going to win a Grand Prix. I mean, I think we're sitting here that I think there are genuinely 5 drivers in the hunt for a Grand Prix win tomorrow, and I think that this time last year we would say that figure was 2. So really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was something that you said about 7 teams being in in Q3. I have no idea when the last time that would have happened. I mean, it would scream 2012, but I honestly have no idea about that. But I agree, and I think that the order is really going to change depending on what type of track we're on as well. Looking at the massive difference between teams in Sector 1 around Bahrain and Sector 2. It's night and day, some of the teams. You look at somebody like Mercedes being almost a second off in Sector 1, but then bringing that gap right down in Sector 2. So maybe somewhere like Spain, for instance, are Mercedes going to be the team to beat? It would be the thing I think about. But yeah, it's going to be a really exciting season. I do think we will fall into a natural order at some point once the teams get on top of the development, and we'll probably see the usual cream rising to the top, I would imagine. But certainly early in the season, I think we could have something similar to 2012 where we just have multiple different winners and different teams up there, and certainly on the podium, and hopefully we get a full Constructors list of points this year, which will be the first time that's happened for a long, long time. So
yeah, and I think as well. I think with 2012 there was a sort of silliness about it. We had 7 winners in 7 different races. That included Pastor Maldonado, which was brilliant for Williams. But there's a genuine chance of having 6 in 6 without it being ridiculous, because you've got 3 teams at the top that could win a race, and I can't see it, but if a team below does get their act together, there could be a surprise win for somebody else. I think that obviously we've had Ocon and Gasly win races, but that was a bit, in both of those cases, it was just because, let's face it, everybody else above them was knocked out. And in Gasly's case, Valtteri Bottas couldn't seem to overtake anybody in the Mercedes. So I think that this year you've got the authenticity about it more than anything. It's great to have a surprise winner. It would be a quote-unquote surprise for 6 drivers to win a Grand Prix, but it's something that could happen without being too ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do look back at those seasons with McLaren, Ferrari, and Red Bull, and even Mercedes on some days with rose-tinted spectacles, perhaps. But they were seasons where other than back end of 2013, you went into the race not knowing which team was going to be out on top and which one, which of the drivers were going to win. They were very evenly matched teams back then. And yeah, as you say, I'm looking forward to it. This so-called new era of F1 certainly delivered in qualifying. We'll see tomorrow in the race how that goes, and of course, I'm sure we'll talk about that at some point. But I mean, shall we get on and see if we can look into our crystal balls and predict what's going to happen this year based on everything we've seen? So, down at the bottom, we're going to look at teams first and then talk about the individual drivers within those teams. So, we're going to start at the bottom, and I'll let you go first, but who do you think will be propping up the rear this year and, maybe even pointless this year? Who knows?
So, I think before I start, I don't think anybody's going to be pointless. I think there's going to be, I would say that even the team in last is going to score a point or two. And that team for me is Williams. And for me, it's unfortunate. I think that they've gone backwards, but it's important to note they've gone backwards in respect to the other teams. I think that they were starting to produce something pretty decent last year. But on most occasions, they were 17th and 18th, because below them they had no competition. It was very much, without sounding too harsh about Haas, it was very much like going back to that era where you had your bottom 3 teams, because Haas just were completely bottom and most weekends couldn't do anything about it. So my point is, for Williams, it's not the worst thing in the world to be last, but I think that they are the team with the least pace. You could see Albon. I think he finished, was it 14th in the end? Albon got in Q2, and that was really the full potential of that car. And he got a 132.6. Lando Norris above him was a 132 dead.
Yeah,
and I just think that gulf 6/10 to a, let's face it, a McLaren that you would think would improve in the next couple of races, just spells alarm bells to me. And the teams behind, Yuki Tsunoda 10th behind. Well, Gasly was far and above Albon. Hulkenberg and Stroll were a couple of tenths behind him. And we'll move on to Aston Martin very shortly. But again, his teammate was the only one behind him as well, and an underperforming Daniel Ricciardo. So that kind of covers all bases there, and there's nowhere for Williams to hide. In terms of the championship, I've gone a lot of it actually on today's pace, but I think this could change. I think that Latifi will bring up the rear. I think Albon will end up 18th. I think Albon might score the odd point here and there. I don't think Latifi will. I think Albon will, again, the odd point, but that'll be it. I've been quite critical of Albon in the past, and I would continue to be. But yeah, in terms of early days today, he did well to get that Williams into Q2, which, according to me, is the worst car. Isn't a bad job. I think that, as you say, once things start to get a little bit better and neutralise on the grid, you're not going to have those sort of results. But kudos to him today. But it's just unfortunate that Williams, as I said earlier, you've got another team in that group with them. But I think that the teams that are above at the moment, particularly with that 6/10 gap, it's just too wide a gap for me at the moment.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've got Williams in 10th as well. And much like you, I think it's other teams have developed better. I think also, which will probably become a bit of a common theme, the Mercedes power unit seems to not quite be there at the moment, or at least the drivability of it. And Williams, of course, are a Mercedes customer team. Like you, I've got Latifi in 21st position in the Drivers' Championship, 21st to 23 for me. And I've got Albon just ahead. And I was going to say exactly the same. I think Albon will get some points this year. I do think Latifi will get a point or two, perhaps in a rain-affected race. But yeah, I think it's going to be a really tough year for Williams, and the questions persist of whether Williams will survive long term, or will they be bought out by, a manufacturer that want to come into Formula One. Is that going to be their route back up the grid? Perhaps I don't know. I don't know what your thoughts on that
I think that obviously last year they were bought out by Dorilton Ventures, I think it's an American company, but ultimately, the standard in Formula One is so good now. You look at McLaren, who were doing so well last year, and that they are struggling, but they're still not last. They're still in that mid pack. And Norris qualifying 13th today, and without sounding harsh, if McLaren are that bad in quotation marks, and still qualify 13th with Norris, I think that just shows how much of a hill Williams have to climb. I think that Ricciardo's performance somewhat can be excused by the testing. I think that Ricciardo's qualifying performance the last couple of years now hasn't been great. He's been one of those who can be caught out in qualifying, a little bit like Perez has been at Red Bull. And I think he'll come better in the race, Ricciardo, so I wouldn't worry too much about that for McLaren.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure we'll get on to talking about McLaren and Ricciardo a lot more in a little bit. But I'll go next for the other team I think are going to be down there, really, really struggling this season. And it wasn't just on today's performance. I thought in testing they looked a little bit shaky as well. And maybe a bit of a surprise, but Aston Martin I've got down in 9th place. And my reasoning for that is I just think some of the teams will get luckier on the days of scoring bigger points. And although I think Aston will develop throughout the season and won't be the 9th fastest team, I think they'll ultimately score less points than some of the teams around them. I've got Lance Stroll in 18th place in the Drivers' Championship. I've got Hulkenberg in 19th, so above Albon. because I do think Hulkenberg will be around a little bit more than just this weekend, and perhaps even for a Mercedes type team in the future, who knows. And I've got Vettel only 14th in the championship, but I do see him perhaps getting the vast majority of points for Aston Martin this year. I don't know what your opinion is.
I've gone exactly the same, but I've gone even worse for Aston Martin. I think they will be the ninth fastest car this year. I think that the signs started to show last year somewhat that they're starting to perform badly in the back end of the season. And I don't think it's much of a surprise, really, because when you look at Force India, Racing Point, they've had that many names now, it's hard to keep up. And the worst thing now is that Alpine are now the old Racing Point colours, which for any casual fan, I mean, David Croft's going to have a mare with that, isn't he? But I feel that they've been going backwards for a while. And I've gone with Stroll to finish 19th in the championship. Unless we have a couple of wet races, and it's so weird, it goes against the norm. Because Stroll is so good in the wet, which you would typically say wet weather driving is the real epitome of skill. But he seems to do well in the wet, but he's so average, mediocre in the dry. And today he was shocking. I've not put any reserve drivers in. I've just kept it to the standard 20, and I've gone with Vettel 17th because although I really rate Vettel, he's a 4-time champ. I think everybody does. As I say, I think that unfortunately there's going to be quite a rift between those bottom two and anybody above them. So I purely based off those comments, I can't put Vettel any higher. Although Vettel's one of my favourites, I'd love to put him higher, but in terms of a prediction, a serious prediction we're going for here, I'm having to put him 17th. And I think that, on some weekends, if Albon does do well, like he did in qualifying today, I think that Albon could quite conceivably out-qualify both of them. And I think if Aston Martin don't develop, I feel like there's some sort of potential there for Williams. For some reason, I just don't see it with Aston Martin. I just don't see any positivity in that team. I just don't see it. I feel like even with Haas last year, when they were so bad, they were focusing on this year. Aston Martin just seemed to be a bit of a team that were meandering a bit last year. And in terms of long term, you have to wonder where their aspirations are. I just can't see it because they've obviously got Sebastian Vettel at the team. He's not going to be around forever. And you just wonder who comes in after that. And if they keep Lance Stroll there, ultimately from a constructor's point of view, you're going to be letting the side down because I don't think he's a consistent Formula 1 point scorer, even if you give him the car that can score points.
Absolutely. The reason I've got Vettel a bit higher up, I do think Force India were one of the best developers in the grid throughout the season, and you would get the odd Grand Prix that they would be ridiculously on point, and I think Vettel will hopefully manage to pull something out of the car. But do you see this being Sebastian Vettel's last season in the sport?
It's a very good question.
Unless Hamilton walks and maybe goes to Mercedes for a year or two?
Well, possibly. You just never know. I mean, you could go for something ridiculous and he ends up back at Red Bull. That would be really inconceivable at this point, but it's almost like he's the only one that could go back into Red Bull because anybody else that they'd want to sign wouldn't touch it. But I feel like Seb would because it's... Could you argue Seb's got nothing to lose because he's already been in that Ferrari team and not really achieved anything and been beaten by Leclerc. And I think that the opportunity for Vettel would be too much to miss. I don't think Verstappen would allow that though. I think that's the point of issue there. But I think for Seb, I feel like he's not ready to finish yet. I feel he's still got that hunger. But that being said, if the car is as bad as I say, he could do. But I'm going to say no at this point. I think Seb's still got more to offer, and I think he still thinks that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, for me, I've got another 3 teams sort of in the next tier. I know that you think there's going to be 5 in this one. But I've gone for Haas in 8th place. Now, that might sound crazy considering Magnussen stuck at 7th on the grid. But I'm sort of going off past performance of Haas in so much that Romain Grosjean finished 4th in 2 consecutive races, I think, in was it 2016, 2017? I can't remember exactly when, but they've never typically been very good at keeping the car developed throughout the season. So I think Haas will start off the season well. I think they'll get plenty of points in the bag, but then I imagine by the end of the year, I think they'll actually drop below Aston Martin and be the ninth quickest team come Abu Dhabi. For me personally, and I've got Magnussen just ever so slightly shading Schumacher in the championship. I've got Magnussen in 15th and Schumacher 16th, and with Vettel's late season form, he's going to go above them into 14th for me. But what are your thoughts on Haas? Of course, a massive turnaround from last season, and quite a crazy pre-season for them as well, with the whole Mazepin situation and
well, Haas, they've had a busy winter, definitely.
Yeah,
and I'm sort of on the hype train with Haas. I've gone with Haas to finish the best of the rest. I've gone with Haas 4th in the constructors. I've gone with Magnussen to finish 8th in the championship. I've gone with Mick Schumacher to finish 11th. And I base some of that on the Ferrari engine. The Ferrari engine seems the quickest. Purely, it might be a loose correlation to make. It might be that Haas and Alfa Romeo have made strides, but particularly if we did this a couple of days ago, I'd have put Alfa Romeo in that bottom group. But I shouldn't be talking about Alfa Romeo, but Alfa Romeo as such have improved. Haas, I expected to improve. I expected them to be good. When they went top in testing, I thought, yeah, get off, and that's a load of tosh. But the way that Magnussen drove, I think that Magnussen's a real underrated driver. I know that Magnussen and Grosjean had their moments, let's just say, had a few more moments than they would ever dare to dream of. But I really rate Magnussen as a solid driver, and I think that having Magnussen there for Mick, I think that will drive Mick as well. And I think they'll be solid point scorers this year, and I think that having Magnussen there, the experience of Magnussen, which, looking at the two teams below Haas, again, without revealing them, those two teams maybe haven't got that experience in both drivers, and I say that because obviously Mick's got the one season behind him now, and I think that having Magnussen there will push him on a little bit. So I've actually gone with Haas to finish 4th in the championship, but I understand what you're saying. I think it could happen. I think that it could very much be early signs, and Haas have flattered and deceived before. I mean, the heartbreak a couple of years ago when they were on song at Australia, when they got both the pit stops wrong.
Yes.
And that cost them, I think, 20-odd points. And I can imagine the end of the season that could have cost them two places in the constructors. And obviously, the early momentum that would have brought them as well. So I just hope it does go well for Haas today. But I feel that they do definitely have pace. And I think that Ferrari engine's on song as well. So that kind of ticks two areas off for me.
Yeah. No, I completely understand that. And it'll be interesting to see. Who have you got in 8th position in the championship then?
So I've gone with Alpine in 8th in the championship. And
okay.
Although they did well today, it's purely a thing of... It's almost like the Aston Martin and Williams to a degree. There's nothing wrong with Alpine as such. They're not slow, but equally, when you look above them, it's tough to put them anywhere higher than they are. I've gone with Haas 4th. And then obviously there's the 3 teams in whatever order, and I can't see them beating any of those teams. If you look at, again, in no particular order, I think McLaren purely will have 2 drivers who will score consistent points. So, I can't see them beating them, and I think McLaren have got the potential to improve. I think Alfa Romeo have got Bottas, who's really consistent, similar to Magnussen, and I think AlphaTauri have got that in Gasly. And the reason I don't say that for Alpine is I think that, although I haven't put more than 20 drivers in my championship standings, I think there's a strong possibility that Alonso won't survive the season. I think there's no secret that this was the year that Alonso wanted to go for the championship, and I think that if he doesn't see it happening this year, I think he could go. I think that it might be a bit too early to say that he might walk, but I think he could go. And I think without Alonso, Ocon's good, but I don't think he's a great driver. And I think if you put Piastri in there, who's their reserve driver at the moment, they're going to struggle to get consistent points. And I think that although they did decently in qualifying today, again, the teams below them, McLaren, I think they'll develop and outperform Alpine. Alfa Romeo, AlphaTauri, and Haas, I think we're all above them. with one driver. Obviously, Alonso finished 8th above the AlphaTauri, but I think that on raw pace, particularly in the race, I think the AlphaTauri has got something up its sleeve, particularly that Red Bull powertrain, we should call it now, not the powertrain of Honda, which it technically is. But it's weird, isn't it, that Alpine are the only Renault engine on the grid. It's strange to think that now, that Renault's influence has got so minor. I think at one point there was probably 4 teams with Renault power, but only one now in the Alpine outfit. But in terms of championship position, presuming that Alonso doesn't go, I've gone with Alonso to finish 12th in the championship, and I've gone with Ocon to finish 16th. And I think that last year you could see that Alonso outperformed Ocon. Ocon obviously massively boosted by that race win in Hungary. That massively boosted his championship standing. And I think Ocon's good. You know, all the drivers are good. They've got to be good to get into Formula One, but I don't think he's... I don't think he's a great driver, and it's hard to put him anywhere above where he is. So I've gone with Alpine to finish 8th.
That's really interesting, because I've went Alpine 4th. so we've got Alpine and Haas, complete opposites.
Well, look, it's good to be different, because at the end of the day, if we sat here and went for the same thing, it'd be pretty boring for us and pretty boring for anybody listening. So
exactly.
I think Alpine have done well today, and I think that they have got the lineup, that's particularly in Fernando, if they have got a good car to really, really challenge. But I guess you can talk a bit more about why you put Alpine 4th. And I'll focus on the negatives.
Well, for me, it's the way Alpine or Renault, that Enstone-based team, what they've done over the last few years is they've really developed their car well throughout the season. And by the end of the season, they tend to be competing for podiums, which is what was happening last year for Alpine. So for me, for Alpine to start the season on the outskirts of the top 10, looking like they're probably going to score some decent points tomorrow as long as their race pace is all right. I think they've got a very solid car. I don't think it's going to be a championship contender, of course, but I do think perhaps by the end of the season we could see Fernando Alonso's first victory since 2013. I do think with the variability from track to track, we could see something like that, especially if we've got a really intense championship fight between 2, 3, 4 drivers and some comings together. That's why I've got Alpine 4th, because I think they'll score some decent points at the start of the season while the likes of McLaren are catching up. And I do think they will develop the car throughout the season and be at podium pace again by the end of the year. So I think it's going to be very, very close between quite a few of the teams for 4th place this year. But I've gone with Alpine just to pip it at the end. I've gone for Alonso, a crazy prediction of 6th in the championship, and Ocon 8th. So. That might suggest that I have got a couple of little shocks in there dropping down. But yeah, that's just my opinion, of course. We are most likely wrong, but
that's the beauty of it, isn't it? That's the beauty of my prediction.
Yeah.
A bit like when you bet on a horse race and your horse pulls up before the second. But let's hear who you've got in 7th.
So I've gone for Alfa Romeo. I think, like you, I think Bottas will be extremely consistent this year. I've actually got him sneaking into the top 10 in 10th position. I think Zhou Guanyu, perhaps, taking a little bit of a while to get up to speed, a little bit like Tsunoda last year. I think he'll have some real highlights this season, but I also think he'll probably make some big mistakes. Also, I don't see Alfa developing the car brilliantly throughout the year. I keep coming back to this, but I think there are some significant trends throughout the last few seasons, particularly with Alfa Romeo. They seem to just go backwards all year until they're pretty much the slowest car at the end of it. So I've got them in 7th. I've got Bottas in 10th and Zhou in 17th in the championship. So just below the 2 Haas drivers for me. But where have you gone for Alfa?
So I've gone one place above for Alfa Romeo. I've gone for them in 6th. As you say, I think they've got a real asset in Bottas. Now he's set free from the Mercedes fold. I think he'll do really well, and that showed today. Obviously, I know it's really early days, but I think that I think similar to when Rosberg left Mercedes, I think we maybe underappreciate how good Bottas was. Because, particularly from a qualifying performance, he was usually on a par with Hamilton, which says something. He wasn't as good in the races, but, there aren't many who are. But I think that Bottas will be a real solid performer. And I think he's got that potential, a little bit like Gasly in the AlphaTauri, to pull off good results. And I guess like Perez, I feel like in those Force India days, just to sneak a podium or a big score and just be there or thereabouts every weekend. And I think that the Alpha seems to have developed similarly to the Haas, and I think that that'll give them a good platform. But as you say, I think what lets the side down slightly for them is over the season how they potentially drop back slightly. But I'm still putting them in 6th. I'm still being positive. As I say, I think they're better than the bottom 3. Obviously better than the team in 7th. But I think that Zhou, it might do okay. I've put Bottas 9th and Zhou 13th. Just that gulf again due to Zhou being a rookie. But Zhou, not done anything wrong so far, but Bottas is going to get the brunt of the points there, I'd say. I think that obviously Zhou will, how much he contributes will be a massive factor, whether they do finish 6th or whether Bottas carries the team and they do finish lower than that at the end.
Yeah. No, I have got Kubica in there in 23rd as well. I do think he'll have another race this season at some point. But yeah, that's where we've put Alpha. In 6th place for me, another Alpha Tauri, and mainly on the exploits of Pierre Gasly, I think. Although I do imagine Tsunoda will have a couple of very good races this year, which will propel him up the championship a little bit and help AlphaTauri just pip Alpha at the post into 6th for me.
Well, I've got Alpha 5th, so you can kind of join up the dots who's the missing team in 7th now. But I've gone with Gasly to finish 7th in the championship, best the rest. I really, really rate Gasly. I think that he's done a fantastic job in that AlphaTauri. I think maybe letting the side down is going to be Tsunoda, and that's what might push AlphaTauri back, and the team that's actually I've predicted in 7th up the grid, but just talking at the moment. I think that Tsunoda, this might be his last season in Formula 1. I feel like, again, early days, but last year he started so well and then dropped off, and then this year, I don't know if you saw practice yesterday, but going up the inside of Lance Stroll into turn 8, that's like a race position thing. You wouldn't do that in practice, and I just think that he hasn't got a brain to be a great driver, and I've gone with Tsunoda 14th. That golfing performance might hurt Alpha in the Constructors, but again, I think that Gasly can have some really good performances and potentially beat Perez on some occasions as well in that Red Bull.
I agree with that. I've got Gasly 11th. I think the pace of the cards is going to let him down a little bit later in the season, and maybe a little bit of reliability as well. But again, I think he is a cracking driver. I think he will be back in the Red Bull sooner than we think, or perhaps he goes to Mercedes when Hamilton has gone. Maybe that's his way into a top team now. I've got Tsunoda in 13th, just above Vettel. As I say, I think it will just come down to a couple of results here and there. I think a lot of the drivers sort of anywhere from 8th down to 16th could be very, very close. And because I think we're expecting a lot of variance this season, and it will just come down to maybe a freak result like Monza 2020. Who knows? But you mentioned a certain team in 7th for you. I'm guessing that's McLaren Mercedes. I've got them in 5th position in the championship. So would you like to explain why McLaren for you are going to be in 7th this season?
Well, I've actually gone for Red Bull in 7th. No, I'm joking. I have gone for McLaren in 7th. And it breaks my heart a bit because I've always been a bit of a McLaren fan. My favourite driver back in the day was Jenson Button. So with that McLaren affiliation, I've got a bit of an affiliation with the team. I like both the drivers. I think Norris particularly. I've just got a sense that McLaren have got bigger problems than maybe they're letting on. And that's a bit concerning. I think that, again, the Mercedes powertrain seems to have a little bit of work to do this year. I noticed in the speed trap that there were struggling a little bit, which you would say for a Mercedes engine in the past would be a bit ridiculous. I think McLaren's saving grace in being higher up the grid is how little or how big these problems are that they're experiencing. I think if they can get back on top, I think there's no question for me that McLaren can be best of the rest. I think the real big show about McLaren is we could have been talking the end of last year saying, right, well, Ferrari and McLaren are going to develop. I think that you said particularly that McLaren would develop and could be up there this year, but it just doesn't seem to have happened in the early days, and I think that it's a worrying sign. I think that I've put Norris in 10th, I've put Ricciardo down in 15th, and obviously Norris beat Ricciardo generally last year in most Grand Prix, although ironically it was Ricciardo who got the race win. And it's sometimes the way things happen. Look at the Ocon and Alonso situation. It's just the way that things happen sometimes. And I do worry a bit about Ricciardo. I think that you can put some sort of excuse on Ricciardo's qualifying performance today because of the testing situation, but then equally, Magnussen missed half of testing, and that didn't give him much of a problem, did it?
And missed the winter in general. You know?
Yeah, exactly. I think the big thing to say is, on that note as well, is how good a job Hulkenberg did today. You can say that his teammate's not great, but to out-qualify your teammate, and we know he's done it before though, don't we? I know this is on a complete sidetrack, but coming in at Silverstone and qualifying third, and I think he's such an underrated driver, Hulkenberg. I know you're a big fan of him, but it is a crime really that he's not got a full-time seat, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's just unfortunately the where we're at the moment with Formula One of unless you are a top line team, you tend to have very much a team leader, and then a second driver who's bringing in a bit of money, or a second driver who's your son, or. I think that's where Hulkenberg has unfortunately fell down. I think if Hulkenberg was racing 10 years before now, if he was in the mid-2000s, I think he would have got to a top team eventually, and it probably would have done a cracking job. But, he's never had that race-winning car. He may get one for one weekend this season. I really don't know, depend on if Hamilton or Russell get COVID at any point. But yeah, I don't think we'll see many more races of Hulkenberg, which is a shame. But I've gone for Ricciardo in 12th. I'm a bit worried about him. I think when Hulkenberg left the sport, that the driver that I like to follow the most is Ricciardo. And I thought when McLaren signed Ricciardo, I thought it was actually a bit of an upgrade on Carlos Sainz. Even as good as Carlos Sainz is, I thought this guy's a proven race winner. He's very, very fast, and he's just not clicking with McLaren for whatever reason. And could it be a situation where he's even dropped halfway through? Because for me, it's just excuse after excuse, and it seems to come from the team more than anything else. I think they're almost in disbelief that Ricciardo just cannot seem to hook up a performance. And as you say, he got that victory last year. Your team leader situation you've got. I think Norris is definitely number one there, isn't he? And I've got him in ninth in the championship. So we're both recognising that Norris is going to be the one out of the two, even though Ricciardo's won 7, 8 Grand Prix in his career. And we're saying Norris is going to comfortably beat him this year in what looks like a bit of a dog of a car at the moment. So it's an interesting one, and age is not on the side of Ricciardo, and he could very easily find himself out the door. I think.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like Piastri, he's been a bit like Alonso, hasn't he? He's just made the wrong choice in his career. I mean, yes, I guess, would you have accepted playing second fiddle to Max? I'm not sure, but I feel like if he had stayed there and was there, obviously, last year when Red Bull came good, I feel like it could have caused a bit of a rumpus, but equally, I think he would have been on, that pace, certainly better than Perez. And I think that, obviously, going to Renault was a complete misstep. That never worked. I don't think it would ever have worked out, truly. And I think going to McLaren was a good step. But unfortunately, he's gone there at the wrong time, a little bit like Alonso did when he went there second time round. And, you do wonder whether motivation's a factor with Ricciardo. I think if he's in that team, look at how he did when he was with Red Bull in 2014. And that was the only time I can think when he was with a good team and he was number one driver. And ultimately, that was a season when Vettel was really struggling. In a similar situation to Ricciardo, I guess, where, a younger driver's with him, you think you've got the measure, and all of a sudden it doesn't happen. And that's not easy to take. And to be number two in that team, although they say, well, everyone is equal, you just have to look at the results and know that Norris is number one in that team, really. So
absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
So it's interesting, but yeah, I think McLaren 7th place could be a lot better though, and I think that's been harsh. So they could be best of the rest. Equally, they could be in that area, but it's so tight between those 5 teams that it's so hard to predict for me anyway.
So, moving on to the top 3 teams then, looking at my prediction, I think it will be very different to your prediction. So, who have you got in 3rd place?
Right, here's the bombshell. I've got my Red Bull 3rd.
Oh, I have as well. Oh, that's great. I love it. Go on, why you got them in 3rd?
Perez.
Me
one
too.
Word,
yeah.
Perez.
Yeah.
I've gone with Max Verstappen to finish 2nd in the championship, which when you say Red Bull are going to finish 3rd is absolutely absurd. But it's a similar situation to that clump of 5 behind. I think that Perez being in the position he is, if you're being beaten by the top 5 every weekend, and on the odd weekend you're getting beaten by Gasly, Magnussen, even Bottas possibly, it's really going to hurt Red Bull. And I think that Verstappen's not going to have the luxury, that's it, of having so many race wins this year. It's going to be a lot tougher against a much improved Ferrari, a Mercedes car that I think will improve as well. And although Red Bull probably pound for pound is the best car on the grid, I just really scratch my head at Perez, because he's another one that I thought, could do a really good job at Red Bull, but just hasn't happened, and early signs seem to be that it's not happened this year either. I mean, the only good thing you can say about Perez, well, he keeps his tyres, but in a top team, that's just not enough, and especially when it's so close, I think they'll feel like that pace deficit is really going to be exploited, and I think that's going to hurt them come the end of the season. I think that unless Verstappen wins the championship and wins it by not a fair distance, but enough for distance, I think that's going to hurt Red Bull. And ultimately, that's why I've gone with Red Bull to finish 3rd. You saw last year where Bottas outperformed Perez, even though Verstappen won the championship, and arguably, although I don't want to talk about last year too much, Red Bull probably had the best car. And if you take Baku and Silverstone away from it, Max could have won the championship, shoulda, woulda, coulda, and all that, but could have won the championship by 50 or 60 points, and still Perez finished below Bottas. Mm-hmm. And obviously Perez had that race winning Baku, which was only possible because Hamilton and Verstappen either didn't finish or didn't finish anywhere of note. So that's why I've not got much confidence in Perez, and that's why I've gone with Red Bull 3rd.
Yeah, me too. I think Perez, as good a midfield driver as he is, I think it didn't do particularly well at McLaren in 13, which I know McLaren didn't have the best car that year, but Button quite comprehensively outperformed him. And, he's had his chance against Verstappen, and it's a very tough environment, don't get me wrong, and I think he's done well to be within 0.3 today, but, it's still 0.3, and you look at the other top teams and you think they're going to be much more on par with each other. And I've actually got Perez down in 7th below Alonso this year. So, and I do think this will be Perez's last year. I think he got a get out of jail free card at the end of 2020 when Red Bull came a-calling. But I don't see Perez being there long term. And looking ahead quite a bit. But if he doesn't perform, if he's going out in Q2 quite frequently like he was last year, then he could be out by Britain, like an Albon or a Gasly,
Especially when the stakes are so high. If the 3 teams are as close as we think they are, then yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think the problem is that it's that taboo now that ever since Verstappen's been there, that Red Bull second seat has been a nightmare. So who the hell would want to go into that Red Bull second seat? I don't think Gasly would want to go in there.
I've gone for a bit of a shocker with Verstappen as well. I've gone third in the championship, and I'll explain it a little bit in a moment. But I think he's either going to be first or third in my prediction, which leaves out second, which you'll see why in a little bit. But yeah, I think. I like you. I thought he was going to absolutely dominate today, and I think it will depend a lot on tomorrow, how these first few races go. I think if Leclerc gets the better of him and maybe Sainz jumps him tomorrow, I think Verstappen might go in a bit of a sulk. I'm not sure, but I've got him third, which I know is a bold prediction. Red Bull third in the constructors as well.
Interesting. So second, I've gone for Mercedes. I've made no secret of the fact that last year I said Ferrari going to come good. And I had a bit of a smirk on my face today because Ferrari did come good.
They did.
Although, for the championship, again, I'm going to stick to my guns. Carlos Sainz is going to win the World Championship this year. And that's just something that I think that, although today it's very early days today, I think that's important to know. I think that Sainz will show Leclerc up, and I think that Sainz is on Max Verstappen's level. We saw that briefly at Toro Rosso. We saw at the company he was with at McLaren with Lando Norris, and he was very close to Lando Norris, who he seems to be a very solid driver. He's beating Ricciardo at the moment. So when you go off those metrics and some of the performances that Sainz put in, it was his first season at Ferrari last year, and I think over the championship season, if Ferrari have got that car, I think Sainz will perform. I think Leclerc is one that won't necessarily go off in a sulk, but I think he's one that will get drawn into rivalries, almost like a Hamilton 2011 sort of vibe. I feel like if he does start having collisions and does start going wrong, I feel like it could spiral a little bit for Leclerc. I think he's got that volatility a lot more, so that's why I've gone for Leclerc to finish fourth in the championship. But obviously you'll see that Ferrari will be first because Mercedes are second. But talking about Mercedes first, I've gone with Hamilton third. I've gone with George Russell fifth. Obviously, you've got both in Mercedes and Red Bull, that caveat of the second driver. And I think that Russell, although he'll do well, it's his first season. It'll take time for him to develop. And I think that Hamilton, similar to an Alonso type figure, will pull the best out of a car that maybe isn't the best on the grid. And although on pound for pound pace they might be third best, Hamilton will still pull something out of that car. And will still finish third in the championship. The reason he won't finish in the top two is I just can't see him, bridging that gap of car performance to how the top two will be. And it might even be fourth for Hamilton below Leclerc. I think I might be being a bit unfair to Leclerc there, but it's just a hunch I've got that Leclerc might start to struggle. So yeah, I've gone with Mercedes second. Obviously, to finish off, I've gone with Ferrari at the top. And I think that they have really come good, and it's not really a surprise. I think that a lot of people tipped them to come good. I thought when we saw them go top in test, everyone thought, oh, here we go again. Ferrari will go top and flat to deceive, but I think they've got a really good chance in tomorrow's Grand Prix, and I think they've actually got, you could say, potentially, I know I've just completely contradicted myself by saying that about Leclerc, but actually I think they could have the best driver lineup on the grid, which sounds ridiculous because it's a lineup with 2 wins between them, and obviously those 2 wins only for Charles Leclerc, but it's a real lineup with potential. I think Red Bull's got the caveat of Perez. I think if Russell does perform well for Mercedes, they could probably rival in that Ferrari driver lineup, but nowhere else on the grid's got that sort of combination of drivers that could be that good.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on Ferrari there, and some really interesting points that you make there. I think our top fives are very, very different. But I think, for me, my top 5 is very, very close. And I think we could have a 2010 style finish to the season. I don't think there'll be 4 drivers in at that stage. I do think, however, there are 5 championship contenders this year for me. And I've actually gone for Mercedes to win the Constructors, which is probably the boldest prediction of the lot, because they're nowhere at the moment, really. But I do think by halfway through, I think they will end up having the fastest car. And I think Lewis Hamilton is going to go on an almighty surge in the last half of the season. He's not going to win the championship, but I think he's going to finish second, and it's going to be very, very close at the end. But I see it looking very similar to last year, where Hamilton very much had the quickest car come the end, and was dominating races by the end of it. I do see that happening again, and I think Russell will chip in as well. But I have actually gone for Charles Leclerc to win the championship, and it was a toss of a coin, really, between him and Sainz for me. And it doesn't sound like it, because I've got Leclerc in first and Sainz in fifth, but honestly, I think there'll be about 20 points in it between the top five come the end of the year, and it'll be a DNF here or there for me. So I've got Mercedes winning the constructors, I've got Leclerc winning the drivers, Hamilton being pipped again in second, and Ferrari just missing out on that constructors through Russell, beating Sainz by a couple of points. I really do think it'll be that close between them, but maybe not on-track performance by then. Maybe we will have a 2009-esque where Ferrari are going to be really quick out the blocks and get loads of wins early on, and then Mercedes will come roaring back at them at the end of the season. But I think it would be really exciting to see either way. Both of us have gone for a Ferrari driver winning the championship, and that would obviously be the first time since 2007. So with your good friend Kimi. And I think it would be awesome to see a driver in red win the championship this year. And I think it will set off a few years of a few different people winning the championship. I don't think we're going to see a big block of one name for a little while now. I think it will alternate between the likes of Verstappen, Leclerc, Sainz, hopefully Russell. I think Hamilton will get one more maybe. But I think we're in for a really exciting time.
It's funny you say about Lewis there. I feel like, ridiculous as it sounds, last year was the last chance for him to win it. If he'd have gone and won last year's championship, the sky's the limit. And that sounds really strange given how we've started, and it wouldn't have made much difference anyway if he had or not. But I don't think he'll win that 8th championship now. I just think that there's too much ahead of him, and I think that the performance of Russell is that big caveat there, because if Russell starts to compete with Hamilton, then you've got that danger. And age, although it is just a number, it can start to catch up with you. But there are a few people I know who said after last year, oh, here we go, Verstappen will start to dominate, and I just don't see that. And I think there's some real solid young drivers coming through. You've got it in MotoGP as well, which is fantastic in both of the formulas I follow. But looking at Formula One, you've got Sainz, and they're not young drivers as such. Sainz and Verstappen, this is their 8th season in Formula One. Starting in 2015, you've got Charlie Leclerc, you've got Russell, you've got Gasly, you've got Lando Norris. If he gets a drive in the future, you've got Mick Schumacher who can come through as well. So there's at least 6 bankers, you would say, that have got some real potential, and that's really exciting. I think that you've got Russell at the top as well. You've got some real exciting young talent that's starting to come through. So this thing about Verstappen dominating, I can't see it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I just think we're in a different era of F1 now, of F1 driver, so to speak. And because so many of them are locked in at their teams for so long, I think you're going to see much more variance in results, because year to year teams do fluctuate, and it depends on how much of a championship battle they're in the previous season generally. But no, it's going to be great, and I'm really looking forward to it. But I think we should do a final roundup of our driver and constructors predictions, because I'm sure people listening haven't been able to keep up with us. So I'll go first with my drivers, and then if you do your drivers and constructors. So my 23rd place driver, Robert Kubica, and then working it up, I've got Piastri making his debut, but finishing 22nd. Latifi, then Albon, Hulkenberg 19th, Stroll, Zhou, Schumacher, Magnussen, Vettel, Tsunoda, Ricciardo, Gasly, then Bottas starting the top 10, Norris 9th, Ocon 8th, Perez 7th, Alonso 6th, Sainz in 5th, Russell 4th, Verstappen in 3rd, Hamilton 2nd, and drivers' champion of Charles Leclerc.
Okay, so Latifi at the bottom in 20th. Following that, we've got Lance Stroll, Alex Albon, Seb Vettel, Esteban Ocon, Daniel Ricciardo, Yuki Tsunoda, Wang Zhou, Fernando Alonso, Mick Schumacher, Lando Norris starting the top 10. Then Valtteri Bottas, Kevin Magnussen, Pierre Gasly, Sergio Perez, George Russell, Charles Leclerc, Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen, and your drivers' champion, Carlos Sainz. And I'll start the teams first. So bottom to top, we'll go with Williams in 10th, Aston Martin 9th, Alpine 8th, McLaren 7th, Alfa Romeo 6th, AlphaTauri 5th, Haas 4th, Red Bull 3rd, Mercedes 2nd, and the Scuderia Ferrari at the top.
And rounding out my top 10 constructors, starting from the bottom, Williams in 10th, Aston Martin 9th, Haas in 8th, Alfa Romeo 7th, AlphaTauri in 6th, McLaren in 5th, Alpine 4th, Red Bull 3rd, Ferrari 2nd, and Mercedes winning a 9th consecutive constructors title. Well, I really enjoyed that, Toby. I don't know about you, but it's always good to have a chat. I really don't know why we don't do it more, but I really hope you've enjoyed listening at home as well. And please do get involved down below in the comment section if you are listening on YouTube. Let us know your driver predictions for the forthcoming season. Hopefully you enjoy it. There's 23 races this year, provided they all go ahead. It is going to be a topsy-turvy season, hopefully, and we'll have a few drivers in contention all the way to the end, because I think that's what made last year so good, was that we actually had a championship battle going down to the wire. But any final thoughts, Toby?
I just hope it's good. I think tomorrow's race will be good. I'm not looking forward to next week's race, because last year's there was a bit of a snooze fest, apart from the drama at the front, but it does look to be a good season. Slightly concerned that there are 23 races. I think that's a bit over the top, personally. But there you go. I feel like a mix between. I guess the 18 or 19 races is probably enough. Somewhere between the classic 16 they used to have and now. I think it's a bit OTT. But who knows? I think personally there are tracks that could be disposed of, but we'll see. It's more action and more for us to watch. So thumbs up to that, I suppose.
Absolutely, and I'm sure we'll discuss that at some point as of our thoughts of the future of F1. We'll let this new era, in quotations, get settled. We'll see how things go and how the wheel-to-wheel racing is tomorrow in particular, but I'm sure we will talk about what effect these new regulations have had and what we think will happen going forward with Formula One. And the number of races is certainly a hot topic at the moment, especially this year. It's finishing in November, in time for the 2022 World Cup to take place. So there's a lot of races to pack in. It's going to be an action-packed season, and I'm sure we will not be just talking about 2023 in our next podcast, because I'd really like to keep up with it this year and share our thoughts, and hopefully people listening will enjoy that as well. But thank you very much, Toby, for spending your Saturday afternoon with me and talking a load of nonsense about F1, and I'm sure these drivers' standings will actually be upside down, and Kubica will win for me and win the championship in my world, and Latifi will win it in yours. And, be a bit of a change of form, wouldn't it? But something drastically wrong would have to happen. But no, thank you very much for listening. Make sure you look at us on Spotify if you're interested, and subscribe to the channel for hopefully some more Joe and Toby talks coming up, I'm sure we'll be doing a World Snooker Championship preview in the coming weeks as well. So make sure you stick around for that. But thank you very much for listening to us. Enjoy the F1 season, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.